In UFO circles, some stories have stirred such a craze that they have become part of the popular culture. Such is the case for the story of the flying saucer that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. If it had not been for the crash, this town of 50,000 would never have become so well known. Tourists come from all over to visit Flying Saucer Central. Every July, the town celebrates the anniversary of what some people consider to be the event of the century. In early July 1947, a local rancher, Mac Brazo, discovered a lot of strange debris on his property, varying from ultralight aluminum paper to small pieces of what looked like balsam wood. A few days later, he told the town sheriff, George Wilcox, who advised the military base outside of Roswell, headquarters of the 509th Bomb Squadron, the only unit in the world with an atom bomb. That same day, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett showed up to recover the debris. A few hours later, Colonel Blanchard, commander of the Roswell base, issued a press release stating that they had captured a flying saucer. But once the debris had been shipped off to the military base in Fort Worth, Texas, authorities retracted that statement. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, stated that the debris found in Roswell was nothing more than the remnants of a weather balloon. The Roswell case was closed, at least for now.
Well,
according to the story, something fell to the ground near Roswell in July 1947. Roswell was the only American nuclear base at the time, and it was believed that the object was a flying saucer. The news was announced by the media following a press release issued by the military base. Then the whole thing was later denied by the U.S. Army. They claimed that an error had been made. The object was nothing more than a weather balloon, not one of those flying saucers that the media had been talking about for 2 weeks, following a sighting by Kenneth Arnold. The story died down until the end of the 1970s, when one of the key witnesses came forward, a Major Jesse Marcel, who had been to the Brazel ranch to recover the wreckage from the flying saucer. He said that the whole story was true, that they really had recovered an alien spaceship in Roswell, and that the U.S. Army had been covering up the truth for 30 years. After that, other witnesses came forward, who were more or less credible. The story became known nationally, then internationally, and now it has become somewhat of a myth. Now, it's hard to tell what's fact and what's fiction, since so many false statements have been added to the mix.
The statements made years later describe a whole different story than what was originally told to the press. According to the new version, 2 flying saucers crashed in the Roswell Desert in 1947. One exploded in the sky over the Brazel Ranch, where all the debris was found. Then the second one landed in the plains of St. Augustine. Or perhaps it was the same object that was damaged while over the Brazel Ranch, then rose again to continue on its westward path. At this second crash site, authorities supposedly recovered a spaceship that was nearly intact, as well as 4 to 6 humanoid bodies. There seemed to be 2 parts to the Roswell story. On one hand, there were statements made about the debris found at the Brazel Ranch, primarily made by first-hand witnesses and at times confirmed in official documents. For instance, Major Jesse Marcel gave an interview in the late 1970s saying that the remnants could not be torn or burned. If crumpled in a ball, they would spring back to their original shape, like mylar. Marcel also explained that before being shown to the press, the real debris was replaced by remnants of a weather balloon. On the other hand, there were statements made about recovering a spaceship and its occupants. Those were basically second and third-hand accounts.
The most famous crash retrieval incident is the Roswell incident of 1947, and that happened just a few weeks after the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which kind of christened flying saucers as a special phenomenon. Broadly speaking, what certainly happened is that an object, probably a disc-shaped object, crashed in the deserts in New Mexico, and in fact quite near the highly secret work that was going on developing the atomic bomb and developing the Alamogordo projects and so on, White Sands, all in that area. And certainly a military unit was sent out to retrieve that disc, and that military unit came from, at that time, the only atomic bomb wing in the world, the 509th Bomb Wing. Now, when they retrieved it and brought it back, there was a big splash in the papers because a high official there actually released the information that a disc had been recovered, and then they were forced to retract that and say that it wasn't anything so on. Now, that certainly happened, but that is not the same as saying flying saucers with a lot of little aliens. What then happened was that there was certainly a lot of mischief going on in, and we do know that it was quite frequent with these sort of emerging radio and TV stations in America. They sort out hoax stories about discs with little bodies and all the rest of it. That was certainly a hoax. Whether Roswell had real little aliens recovered or whether it was mixed up with the hoax is really difficult to determine now. But when we look at the history of the way it came out, Roswell was actually not particularly, no one was interested in Roswell right from 1947 virtually to 1973, when Stanton Friedman started to actually bring out a lot of information about this. And he kind of put the stories together, made a pretty coherent package, which was very interesting, but which may have picked up some of the silly stories along with some of the real stories. So there's a certain amount we do know, certain amount that's speculated, certain amount I feel is pretty doubtful that has been led on in the past few years. We've become very conspiracy theorist and very exaggerated in our fears and so on. So I think Roswell is probably not all people would like it to be, but it's certainly one of the real crash retrievals of something anyway in history.
I would say that there are two stories related to Roswell. One is associated with the first alleged crash site, visited by Jesse Marcel, where they found strange material with properties that were extraordinary for that time period, such as aluminum paper that could not be torn, which would return to its original state after being crumpled in a ball. There were several witnesses, including Mark Brazel, the rancher who found the debris, Jesse Marcel, who recovered the debris, his wife and son, to whom he showed the wreckage before going to the base, as well as the people at the base and the sheriff of Roswell. Then there's the second story, which might be true, but which is only supported by second-hand accounts or unreliable witnesses. According to this story, there was an initial crash, and then, after hitting the ground once, the spaceship allegedly flew further and crashed again. And that's where they found the bodies in the ship. That's when the Roswell cover-up began, according to witnesses.
The Roswell crash of 1947 is something that perhaps the official public world may never truly know. It is my suspicion that something not of America's technology crashed, not Soviet. You could do the math. I think that it would be something that we might call extraterrestrial, that crash at Roswell. Crashed or landed, whatever, something that the American military recovered. I do believe that that is the least crazy scenario. The mogul explanation is weak, threadbare, and really nothing to hang your hat on. There is, on the other hand, a great deal of testimony from witnesses, not all of whom are crazy, not all of whom are fabricators, in my view, who describe things about that make me think it was extraterrestrial. For example, the testimony of General Arthur Exon. Exon at the time was an officer at Wright Airfield in Ohio. Exon did not ever see wreckage, did not ever see dead bodies. But Exon, who later became the commander of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, did say that immediately after the Roswell event, he heard rumors at Wright Airfield of alien bodies and heard reports from people who analyzed the material, which went to Wright-Pat, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that described it as extraordinary. I mean, in other words, why would a Mogul balloon be tested at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Why? Why would they be testing this material? It makes no sense. The reason I think that an alien craft did crash at Roswell is because I think that there's sufficient evidence for the rest of the UFO phenomenon, both before and after 1947.
In 1994, wanting to know more about the Roswell crash, New Mexico Republican Stephen Schiff went to see the Air Force, who politely told him that he should check with the National Archives Office. At the National Archives, he was told that he should speak to the Air Force for information about Roswell. Tired of being treated like a ping-pong ball, Schiff went to the General Accounting Office, a sort of ombudsman for U.S. politicians, who instructed the Air Force to allow Schiff access to its archives. In July 1995, the GAO published its investigation report. Other than stating that several documents had been lost or destroyed, the report mentioned that certain documents had been found relating to secret projects that might shed light on the Roswell mystery.
When the Air Force had to reopen its files, I don't think they really knew what they would find, because it had been so long that no one really remembered anymore. They dug into the files and discovered what UFO researchers already knew. Something had indeed landed in Roswell. It wasn't just a tale or a rumor. The question was, what exactly was it that fell? At the time of the incident, the world was still in the Cold War period, and the state's #1 enemy was not the Martians, it was the Russians. The military was using every means possible to keep track of what the Russians were doing, especially with respect to the atomic bomb. The US was leading the arms race at the time, but not for long. One of the projects designed for this purpose was the launching of sensors into the upper atmosphere to detect possible atomic bomb explosions by the Russians. The Roswell incident was supposedly linked to this project. In my opinion, a project like this would be the most likely explanation for the object that landed in Roswell. They were launching trains of balloons, several weather balloons tied together, hundreds of feet long, with measuring instruments attached at the end. It was a top-secret operation. The balloons were launched into the upper atmosphere where the instruments would take their readings. Then the balloons would fall into the desert. It seems that what the rancher found on his property was nothing more than remnants of a train of balloons. He thought it was wreckage from a spaceship, but he hadn't actually seen a spaceship, just pieces of metal and assorted junk, which he brought back to the Roswell base. The Roswell base was not aware of the balloon train program being carried out by the Alamo Gordo base. When they saw the debris, they used the word flying disc, since it was a buzzword at the time, and the story took off from there.
While the GAO was preparing its report, the Air Force decided to publish its own. The Roswell report was a 1,000-page document in which flying saucers came from a strange planet named Mogul.
The first report explained the Roswell crash as the probable wreckage of a type of classified balloon known as Mogul, which was a real project, which was designed to determine when the Soviet Union would detonate its own nuclear device. This was 1947 and 48. Mogul was a highly classified project. There were Mogul balloon tests in that area, and there were crashes of Mogul balloons. The Air Force released its report in 1995 that stated this thesis.
The Air Force took the lead, publishing its first report in 1994 and 1995, admitting that they had not told the truth originally. It had not been a weather balloon. It had been a large balloon train, referred to as Mogul balloons, which were top secret at the time, used to detect Russian atomic explosions. They had not worked very well. but they were highly secret at the time. And that's why the Army had lied to the press, to hide the truth.
When the military investigated in 1995, Captain McAndrew, one of the authors of the report, discovered a program for spying on the Russians. At the time, the program was top secret. But in 1995, there was no longer any reason to keep it secret. When the Roswell incident resurfaced in the 1980s, they had forgotten about it and didn't see any reason to go digging into their archives. I think that people give the government too much credit, whether it be in the US, France, Canada, or some other country, when they think that the government knows everything. They don't remember what they did 30 years ago. They had to go digging, and what they found is what appears in the 1,000-page report. The report itself isn't that long. The rest is just appendices and files from that time period that they republished.
Practically two-thirds of this huge report is nothing more than technical data on the Mogul project. The report gets into the nuts and bolts, everything you could possibly want to know. After reading that report, you could practically write a thesis on the subject. This report makes us wonder how the country's top military experts working at the base at the time could have acted like General Jack Ripper from the movie Dr. Strangelove. They would have had about as much credibility if we are to believe the report released by the U.S. Air Force. The report describes its military as untrustworthy individuals, incapable of recognizing mundane technology that any farmer would know to be man-made and not alien in nature. If we look at the diagrams and photos of the Mogul project, all we see is ordinary material. The mission itself was secret, but the technology dated back to 1947, and there was nothing special about it. So the report really makes its information officers look incompetent.
Then in 1997, with uncharacteristic concern, the U.S. Air Force released a second report called Roswell, Case Closed. This report made it clear that the Army wanted to put an end to rumors of a spaceship found with bodies in it, a subject that had been overlooked in the 1995 report.
And in 1997, because the Air Force hadn't dealt with rumors of alien bodies recovered and so on, issued another report that tried to explain that. And they said that, well, the body stories are probably the result of the testing of parachute airdrop testing, in which we would drop these human-sized dummies in the ground to test airdropping. Now, those tests occurred in the 1950s. They did not occur in the 1940s. Nevertheless, this was the Air Force explanation.
Since questions were still being asked about alien bodies being discovered, which the Army had denied, they decided to explain it in the second report. They ended up explaining the second crash. After having passed off the first crash as nothing more than Mogul balloons, they brushed off the second one, saying, well, those people, the witnesses, perhaps they were mistaken. Those witnesses all seem to have Alzheimer's and cannot recall the exact time of the incidents. They seem to have mixed up things that happened in the test areas around Roswell, New Mexico between 1947 and 1964. They mentioned ground testing of NASA probes that could have been mistaken for a flying saucer. It was the same for the crash test dummies. They mixed up several things that took place in the 1940s and 1950s. There were people who served as test subjects to examine the effects of plane and balloon crashes, victims of real accidents, as seen by the photo of a pilot with a bandaged head. According to the report, that's why people were so confused at the time. They were mixed up, and they invented this story of the second crash based on elements that were scattered in time and space.
As far as the Air Force was concerned, the Roswell saga had nothing to do with visitors from outer space. The alleged crash and recovery of alien bodies was nothing more than a series of military activities carried out in the Roswell Desert between 1947 and 1965. An explanation that many people find difficult to believe.
I've read the United States Air Force, the two United States Air Force reports on the Roswell incident. I think one of them entitled "The Roswell Case Closed," and I have to say it looks pretty convincing. They've clearly made efforts to find as much information as possible about this, and I think they've done their best to put into the public domain the position as they see it. And where information is missing, I don't see that there's necessarily anything suspicious about that, because that's the way that governments and large bureaucracies work. Sometimes I lose a paper that I wrote last week, so I don't blame anyone if documents that are now over 50 years old are missing. I think it was perhaps unfortunate that there was this attempt to link the Roswell incident with the crash test dummy tests, because those, to me, the times were not even the same, and it seemed slightly irrelevant to bring that in. But, you know, perhaps they were just trying to address, to the best of their ability, the allegations about humanoid bodies. But I think that part was possibly not directly relevant.
Now, it's hard to tell what's fact and what's fiction, since so many false statements have been added to the mix.
The statements made years later describe a whole different story than what was originally told to the press. According to the new version, 2 flying saucers crashed in the Roswell Desert in 1947. One exploded in the sky over the Brazel Ranch, where all the debris was found. Then the second one landed in the plains of St. Augustine. Or perhaps it was the same object that was damaged while over the Brazel Ranch, then rose again to continue. Covered a lot of strange debris on his property, varying from ultralight aluminum paper to small pieces of what looked like balsam wood. A few days later, he told the town sheriff, George Wilcox, who advised the military base outside of Roswell, headquarters of the 509th Bomb Squadron, the only unit in the world with an atom bomb. That same day, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett showed up to recover the debris. A few hours later, Colonel Blanchard, commander of the Roswell base, issued a press release stating that they had captured a flying saucer. But once the debris had been shipped off to the military base in Fort Worth, Texas, authorities retracted that statement. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, stated that the debris found in Roswell was nothing more than the remnants of a weather balloon. The Roswell case was closed, at least for now.
Alors l'affaire de Roswell, très rapidement, c'est...
Well, according to the story, something fell to the ground near Roswell in July 1947.
Seule base nucléaire américaine.
Roswell was the only American nuclear base at the time, and it was believed that the object was a flying saucer.
La presse
The
l'annonce.
news was announced by the media following a press release issued by the military base.
L'affaire est démentie dans
Then the
la
whole thing was later denied by the U.S. Army.
de l'armée américaine en disant que
They claimed that an error had been made. The object was nothing more than a weather balloon, not one of those flying saucers that the media had been talking about for 2 weeks, following a sighting by Kenneth Arnold.
Kenneth Arnold à son observation. L'affaire
In UFO circles, some stories have stirred such a craze that they have become part of the popular culture. Such is the case for the story of the flying saucer that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. If it had not been for the crash, this town of 50,000 would never have become so well known. Tourists come from all over to visit Flying Saucer Central. Every July, the town celebrates the anniversary of what some people consider to be the event of the century. In early July 1947, a local rancher, Mac Brazo,
the story died down until the end of the 1970s, when one of the key witnesses came forward, a Major Jesse Marcel, who had been to the Brazel ranch to recover the wreckage from the flying saucer. He said that the whole story was true, that they really had recovered an alien spaceship in Roswell, and that the U.S. Army had been covering up the truth for 30 years. After that, other witnesses came forward who were more or less credible. The story became known nationally, then internationally, and now it has become somewhat of a myth.